Hey guys, welcome to Math Academy Rewind, where we go back and look at topics we've already covered this year. Today's rewind takes us through rigid transformations. So if you remember, a transformation is just moving a figure on a coordinate plane. There were 4 types of transformations we covered. Translation is a slide, reflection is a flip, dilation is to enlarge or reduce, and rotation is to turn. So let's get started and talk about translations, which again is just sliding a figure. Anytime we're doing a translation, all we're doing is we're counting how far the translation tells you to. So in this example, it says to translate the figure 5 units left and 2 units down. So we would just count from each of these points, 5 units left and 2 units down. Then go to G, 5 units left, 2 units down. Then go to M, 5 units left, 2 units down. And those would be our new points. So if we look at that, our final answer should look like this. Again, we just translated it, 5 units left and 2 down. Important to notice that our final answer has to have our prime marks, if you remember doing those. So B prime, G prime, and M prime. Again, this is translating a figure. Let's talk about reflections, or flipping a figure. So when we reflect, we're just flipping each point over the instructed line. A lot of times it'll say over the axis, but in this case it says to reflect across y equals 1. So if you remember, we did this earlier this year. You find on the y-axis where 1 is, which is where my arrow points, and that's going to give us a horizontal line that we're going to reflect across. So y equals 1 would be this blue line, and then you're just counting every line from there. So if we start with G, we would count that G is 1 place away from our line, so we count 1 place down, and there's G prime. Okay, let's go over to M. M is 2 places from that line, so we go up 2 places, and we have M prime. B is 1, 2, 3, 4 places from our line, so we count 4 places down, 1, 2, 3, 4, and that leaves us with B prime, and then we're ready to connect our points and get our answer. So I'm going to connect G prime to B prime to M prime, and here we go. We have our point that's reflected across y equals 1. Next, let's talk about dilations. Remember, dilations is enlarging or reducing or shrinking a figure. The easy part of dilations is really we're just multiplying each number by whatever the scale factor is. In this example, our scale factor is 1/2. Dilate by 1/2. So that means each point here gets multiplied by a scale factor of 1/2. So here's what that would look like. The first thing you would want to do is go ahead and write out what your points are currently. So B is at 4, 5, M is at 5, -1, and G is at 2, 2. We're going to multiply every single number by half. So 4 times half, 5 times half, 5 times half again, and so on. That's going to leave us with these points. Okay, now as you notice, some of these points have halves or 5/10, so we're going to do some estimating when we put it on our graph, but we should end up with a figure that looks similar to this. Now again, our figures should be the same shape, just different sizes. So if you ever get a different shape, and it's not the exact same, you know you've made some mistake. As always, we need our prime marks, B prime, G prime, and M prime to get our final answer. Our last transformation we're going to look at would be a rotation. Again, that's just turning a figure. So our first step says to list where our points are to start with. This is very important. Don't just try and eyeball it, actually list them. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and I did that up at the top. So here's where my points are currently. Then we need to remember that for every 90 degrees, you flip the numbers and give the sign of the new quadrant where the number is going. Our example here says we're going to rotate this figure 270 degrees clockwise. This sentence tells us 2 very important pieces of information. The first piece is that it tells us we're moving clockwise, which is highlighted in blue. Remember, clockwise is in this direction around our graph. So from the top of our coordinate plane, it's to the right. This is clockwise. So that's the first important piece of information. The second important piece is our degrees. 270 degrees tells us we're moving 3 quadrants. So that means every one of these points has to move 3 quadrants. So for B and G that are already in the same quadrant, 1, they'd be moving 1, 2, 3 quadrants over here into quadrant 2. Point M is moving 1, 2, 3 quadrants over here into quadrant 4. So if you look at this, we're going to go ahead and flip our numbers, because it said for every 90 degrees you flip them. So our numbers need to be flipped. So instead of 4, 5, 5, 4, instead of 5, -1, 1, 5, and 2, 2 stays the same. Then we give the sign of our new quadrants. So again, we said that our point B prime was moving into quadrant 2, which is negative, positive. M prime was moving into quadrant 1, which is positive, positive. And G prime is moving into quadrant 2 as well, which is negative, positive. So we switched them, gave the sign of the quadrant they're going into, and that leaves us with a rotated figure that looks like this. This has been your edition of CMA Math Academy Rewind.